I would like to welcome all our partners and each of you. Now, this is a difficult time, and I'm really happy that we can see each other, that we can welcome each other in person. This is really valuable, and I know that we can do it because lots of our compatriots are now in the East and in the South fighting for us from the defending us from the aggression of the Russian Federation. We really value this time and we have to use it in a productive way. Ukrainian Catholic University has its strategy, and the strategy is implemented and the strategy is followed by. And one of the points of this strategy is to contribute to the transformation of Ukraine and its post-war recovery. We know that the indispensable part of victory is victory at the battlefield, but Ukraine will have its future in case it is transformed from the inside. Therefore, the international community and the European Union there was a period in the history where everything was described with the word socialist or communist. Now we cannot just substitute these words for European. We have to undergo deep transformations at the level of senses and principles. And one of the key points of this transformation is the respect for the human rights, for the rule of law. It may be an inconvenient process, a painful process, but it is an important condition for Ukraine to survive, not only physically, but to be part of the European community. It is a great honor for me to welcome here Ms. Olena Uvarova with her research and with her project that is aimed at bringing these principles into economic part because it is an important condition of Ukraine's integration into the European Union. And it is also the condition for the future of Ukraine. It's a very important point for us, for Ukraine. Therefore, Olena, I'm happy to welcome you here in the Ukrainian Catholic University. During pre-COVID times, Olena was teaching our students the course of ethics and law, and some of our graduates still remember this course, and some of them say that they still use the knowledge from this course in certain situations. So we are really grateful to you for this. I wish you fruitful work, nice discussions, good insights, enjoying live communications with people who are here. I wish you very nice atmosphere at our Ukrainian Catholic University, and we are happy to see you.
Thank you, Svetlana. It's for the first time that we are holding our joint event together with the School of Law of the Ukrainian Catholic University and our great partners. And we are really grateful to the UNDP in Ukraine, to the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine. We are grateful to the Center on Business and Human Rights. We are grateful to the Global Compact. We are grateful to the Business School of the Ukrainian Catholic University and to the Wageningen University, because it was thanks to our joint effort that we managed to organize this event. And we really hope that after this event, we will keep our communication and our partnership, and we will have more of joint projects, joint events, joint trainings. We're already doing the planning. As Svetlana has mentioned, the attention within those 2 days, because we are going to work both today and tomorrow. Please join us tomorrow. There will be some practical classes on due diligence, on corporate sustainability due diligence. So we will be working along the topic of corporate sustainability due diligence, and we will be working with a wider topic of the impact of business on human rights, the rule of law, and democracy. The roundtable discussion is exactly dedicated to the question whether the transformation capacity And here I mean the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which was enacted in July this year. So the question is whether this transformative capacity and this directive can really change the way of thinking in business and the way of doing business and the business models that will be most frequently used by businesses, the business strategies that they will apply. So for Ukraine, this directive is important due to several reasons. First of all, because of our potential membership in the EU, and also it matters from the point of view of the behavior of Ukrainian business in international business in Ukraine. And also, it's important because Ukraine will be in the focus of attention of our European partners due to a norm in this directive about due diligence related to human rights in conflict-affected areas and in high-risk areas. And this paragraph of the directive was introduced specifically because of the war in Ukraine, because in the original text of the directive, this paragraph was not included. That's why we can see that really Ukraine will be in the focus of attention in this respect. So we are launching our official agenda. And once again, let me express my gratitude to Svetlana for being so hospitable and for helping us to hold this joint event and for your kind welcoming words. And we will start with some opening remarks coming from our UNDP partners, Christoforos Politis. He's the acting chief of UNDP in Ukraine, and he will speak about the stimulation of inclusive remediation and the role of responsible businesses and business practices.
And hopefully we will have a very interesting and engaging roundtable today. Today, we're talking about the responsibility and responsible business in the current conditions of Ukraine and the current engagement of Ukraine in recovery. It is important for me to highlight that while today 65% of micro and small and medium enterprises have been affected by war, this is a figure that UNDP has established with the Ministry of Economy and other partners here present through its recent study. In the human rights study as well, we are talking about many businesses that have been capturing workforce. The human capital is being lost on a day-to-day basis. Yet at the same time, the businesses are thriving, are surviving, and are investing in their capital and in the employability of the country and the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. Today, we're talking about a roundtable that will dive into a directive of the EU. We are faced with many challenges, but the most important element is the trust of the system, of the society in the businesses. The businesses today are a platform for engagement, for a different, transformative, new recovery process, and most importantly, a business that is based on trust. Human rights remains at the core, at the center of engagement between the public sector, the businesses, and the citizens, and ultimately, of course, the international community that is expected to invest in Ukraine. Today, UNDP is putting a lot of focus on strengthening the business platforms, but also, and most importantly, strengthening and making sure that the businesses are ready for this EU accession process. The corporate responsibilities of business is at the heart of this process, and this is where the EU directive on sustainable business due diligence is at the heart of the whole process as well. This is where we have a survey currently that would assess where do we stand as the business community. And this is where I would like also to emphasize and invite you all to engage in this survey with UNDP to make sure where you stand on the barometer of this directive, on this EU directive. This is where we will all be ready to engage in a market that is broader than Ukraine, but most importantly, we would all be ready to strengthen the trust in the business sector. We greatly appreciate the partnerships that we have today with the Ministry of Economy, with the Yaroslav Mudry National University, with the Ukraine Catholic University, with the Business School of Lviv, and others who are here present as well with us in this event. And I would like to express my deep appreciation to them for the partnership and also for the engagement we have in making sure that business is transformative, that business is lifted to a different level, and that business adopts and engages through proper innovative rights-based practices that engages with the citizens and with the international community based on a trustworthy engagement and a trustworthy relationship. Thank you.
Дуже дякуємо.
Thanks a lot. And yes, by the way, I did not focus on this in my introduction, but definitely this range of topics really matters for us through in the context of restoration and recovery in Ukraine. And we have even mentioned this in the title. So now we are going over to our first session, and in this session we will have the following participants: Lira Yakulevichiana, who is a member of the Task Force of the UN for Business and Human Rights, Professor, Dean of the School of Law of the University of Mykolas Rameris. And I need to mention that Lira is our friend. She's been our friend for a long period of time, and this year she has become member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, which is good for all of us. Because we have great expectations for this group. We hope that our region will be mentioned in the international map. And I know that now Lira is preparing very actively a regional session within the Global UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. And we will share the registration form with all our participants for you to be able to follow this online. This will take place on the 26th of November, this session, and the forum will take place for 3 days, the 25th up to the 27th of November. Also, we will be joined by Christine Kaufmann, who is the head of the working group, OECD on corporate responsibility of business. We will have Belle Beckendorf, researcher of the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, and she is actively engaged in working at the issues related to implementation of the directive. We will also have Marina Kupchuk. I would invite Marina to join me here. Marina is also an old friend of ours, and I think that you met Lira and me for the first time at the Kharkiv Forum in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And we will have Alexander Melnichenko, who is the acting Executive Director of Ukraine Invest. He will also join us online. And I would like to say that we have 51 online participants. We are also welcoming all our online participants. Thank you for joining us. Let me remind you that you can be listening to the presentations in simultaneous interpretation. And let me give the floor to Lira.
Question to you, Lira. What key trends on business and human rights you see globally and in our region, and what perspectives we can expect?
Доброго ранку, шановні колеги.
Good morning, dear colleagues.
If you can hear me well as I am online, if everything is fine.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very nice words, Olena, dear organizers of the roundtable, dear participants of the roundtable. I am not with you physically, although I would like to be, but rest assured that all my heart and all my mind is with you in Ukraine, with Ukrainian people. And in this short intervention, let me share some insights on the general trends, and in particular on the legislative trends, including on the corporate sustainability due diligence. This year has been really a very rich year for all the legislative developments. But let me start from the beginning by congratulating also all of the participants who are in presence in the room, but also online, because if you joined this roundtable, this topic, that means that you are people who are thinking about the future, and you will be privileged actually to shape the future with your skills, with your interest and motivation. But for that, we all need to learn to be open to these new topics and to see the relevance for all of us, be it for business, be it for academia, be it for civil society, for the state. So we are all together in this quite broad, but also at the same time quite specific topic. Now, generally, if we look at corporate social responsibility, and of course, I'm dealing more with the business and human rights area, this is really an important area. This is developing area, but in our region, in the Central Eastern European region, this topic has been rather misunderstood and sometimes quite undervalued. And this is also partially due to the fact that there is a huge gap in awareness, in knowledge in this field. And I think this roundtable is really an important effort to fill this gap. Now, in this region that we live, we have specific circumstances that also shape the context of those trends that we see now. And this context will also have an influence on how the legal developments in the European Union, the legal developments in the Council of Europe, in the UN, will shape the practices in our region. Firstly, if we look at corporate sustainability area and various issues that are encompassed, starting from human rights, anti-corruption, climate change mitigation, and other elements, traditionally, all those issues have been considered as an exclusive prerogative of the state. So the societies were not quite expecting businesses to engage. And on the other hand, the businesses were also not very eager to engage because there was no really pressure from the society. But now the context is changing because in our region also what is particular is that sometimes we believe more and we are pushed more in a good sense by regulatory developments rather than, let's say, by culture, our mentality, or let's say, push from the civil society. And this year, as I mentioned, was very rich with regulatory developments in both the European Union, but also Council of Europe. So let me stress just three of those, considering that time is very limited. First of all is already mentioned by the previous speakers, the long-awaited European Union Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the so-called CSDDD. Which was adopted in spring of this year, and in summer it entered into force. Of course, there will be 2 years transposition period for the EU member states, but this directive clearly will directly and also indirectly impact countries like Ukraine and other countries outside the European Union at the moment. Now, this directive clearly creates obligations for specific scope of companies, for basically large companies, to undertake the risk-based due diligence analysis to identify and then assess and then address and remedy both potential but also actual adverse impacts on human rights, environment, in connection both with companies' own activities but also in broader company operations. What is a breakthrough in this directive and what is also quite new for the companies that this directive creates a civil liability mechanism where companies may be held liable for damages caused by the failure to meet those due diligence requirements. Clearly, the implementation of the directive will require a big complex of measures, and here we need to be engaged, both academia, but also businesses, civil society organizations. As I mentioned, there is still a big vacuum of knowledge, of practices in this area, and we all need to learn. The second development, which I would like also to just briefly highlight, is related to overall development of technologies. And this is, again, a completely different subject that would require a full day or even two to discuss. But I also wanted to highlight this area because increased use of technologies, not only by the technological companies that are developing technologies, including new technologies like AI, but also those companies that are deploying technologies. They are faced both with some positive developments related to progress in technological development, but also there are a number of risks already in practice related to that. So in this context, the important development that has happened this year also is, for the first time ever, the first regulations in Europe on artificial intelligence. And here I have in mind the International Convention and the Framework of Council of Europe on AI, human rights, rule of law, and democracy, which was adopted in May of this year. And very proudly, I can announce that it was also open for signature this September here in Vilnius, where I'm speaking with you. And this convention, of course, does not create certain new human rights obligations, but it makes sure that in all activities in the life cycle of AI systems, the activities that business are undertaken, these activities have to be consistent with human rights, democracy, and the rule of law principles. At the same time, not, of course, stopping the technological progress and innovation. Now, this framework convention is, of course, complementing the existing standards on human rights, democracy, and rule of law, but it aims to fill those legal gaps that we may see arising from rapid technological advances, because we all know that technologies develop faster than the regulation. And also just to highlight that we have first ever regulation, and it is a regulation as an act on artificial intelligence in the European Union, which clearly will have impact not only in the EU member states, but also in the acceding states, candidate states, and much beyond. Now, a lot has been explored on AI producing technical companies, but indeed still quite little is being discussed about deploying companies. And we know that companies are using AI, for instance, in their human resource selection, in retail, in customer relations, in many other areas, including also when businesses interact with states. So states also need to be aware of certain risks, and businesses will be affected when states is procuring from businesses certain services where due diligence will absolutely be needed. The third legislative development, and I would say not maybe legislative development, but legal development that is related to corporate sustainability and that we face in Europe, and not only in the European Union, but also much broader in the Council of Europe, but also elsewhere in the world, is the legal developments related to increasing and becoming really very popular climate change litigation. And we have seen the first judgments in climate cases at the European level in Klima Seniorinen versus Switzerland case, in Agostino Duarte versus Portugal, and even Lithuania as the country was involved in this case together with other 32 European countries, and judgment in admissibility judgment in Careme versus France. So these judgments, of course, this is just the beginning at the European level as a mandatory level, but these judgments also demonstrate a trend, a more global trend of increasing number of climate litigations throughout the world. And some of those litigations, they are already affecting companies, and in that respect, in the corporate sustainability due diligence obligations or risks assessments, impact assessments, clearly the climate change issues will need to be taken into account. Let me briefly turn now to broader context beyond the directive, where I believe that the directive will influence the developments in Central and Eastern European region beyond the EU member states, is because the directive is not in a vacuum. It exists along with numerous other instruments that have been already part of legislations, part of practices beyond the European Union. And of course, I'm here more in a better capacity to speak about the UN guiding principles on business and human rights and how they interact with this particular directive and other obligations. Now, I must say, and I can only, given the time, just refer and to your attention that the working group on business and human rights, which I represent, as Olena mentioned, since a couple of months, representing the Central and Eastern European region. Now, the working group has published a report to the General Assembly on this topic back in 2018, highlighting already existing practices at that time, highlighting what the government is doing, governments are doing, what businesses are doing, what investment community is expecting from businesses, and how we all could contribute to scaling up those obligations or sometimes expectations. But considering the time, I just would like to highlight about this report. And Olena has already kindly mentioned that the corporate sustainability due diligence will be a very, very important topic in the upcoming global forum, the largest global forum in Geneva at the end of November. We are going to have our own regional section to reflect on the developments and specificity in our region, but also the directive and corporate sustainability due diligence will be really a horizontal topic in many, many sessions that will be part of this regional forum. So I would really encourage you to take part either in presence if you have an opportunity, or at least to join online. And I would like to share a few observations now with regard to UN global principles and implementation of the corporate CS3D directive. So firstly, as you may be aware, or you will learn during today's roundtable, that the directive contains various limitations. For example, on the scope of companies that it's covering, certain business operation, or for example, inclusion of financial sector or investment sector in more broadly. But if we look at the broader context, as I mentioned, the directive has very clear links with UN general principles to other instruments that will be also discussed today. So those instruments have generated number of practices that we can already learn. Now, furthermore, although the EU member states will be able to transpose the requirements of the directive quite flexibly, and naturally the states that are aspiring for EU membership will also have we'll see that flexibility, how the directive can be implemented. But we have to bear in mind two important issues. Firstly, that the states might go for upper standards than the standards in the directive. This is allowed in the directive. And this is not to say that there will be more obligations, but just to say that we should not really stop at the level where we are. At the same time, the European Commission also, given that the directive has been a compromise, and in a couple of years' time, the Commission will come back to certain provisions, for example, to the investment sector, to the financial sector, and might revise also certain obligations. Now, you may also say, and where the UNDP representative also highlighted that indeed, if we talk about Ukraine already experiences huge challenges. But my dear colleagues, I also believe, and the business people know very well, that indeed where there are difficulties, then we we are thinking about how in innovative ways we could come about the solutions for those challenges. So I really believe that embarking on the future topics that are important for the world, that are important for the European Union, finding our own, in our own region, finding, let's say, the room for these developments, that this could encourage innovations, it could encourage competitive advantage for Ukrainian companies, for other companies in the region. And rest assured that all of us here in the academia, in international organizations, that we stand ready to support you as much as we can. And I would like to end with this note, because I know that the time is very limited and there are other speakers, but I would really wish to get inspiration from those speakers that are gathered for you today in this roundtable, to gather inspirations from already existing practices. And I would like to thank my dear colleague Olena Ovarova and all the other organizers for such a great initiative and for possibility to share some of the insights.
Thank you very much, Lira. It was very insightful and yeah, very, very useful start of our conference, of our event. So a lot of information already received. So thank you very much for this very interesting contribution. And I would like to give the floor to Christine Kaufmann, Chair of the OECD Working Party on Responsible Business Conduct, Professor of International and Constitutional Law at the Faculty of Law at University of Zurich. And dear Christine, thank you very much for attending the roundtable. I should say that OECD National Contact Point in Ukraine is one of the drivers of business and human rights responsible business conduct agenda in Ukraine. And also, I would like to share that I find the OECD policy brief on responsible business conduct in situation of Russian invasion of Ukraine is one of very important and very interesting document. And I took a lot of insights from this document. And so thank you very much for this document to OECD that it was developed and published and take us beyond business as usual. And I would like to ask you, do you see the potential of synergy between OECD responsible business conduct standards and corporate sustainability framework in general and corporate sustainability due diligence directive in particular? And one more question, what should be the first step for businesses which just are starting their corporate sustainability journey?
Thank you very much, and a very good morning to all of you. I'm so pleased to be with you this morning, and I'm sorry I joined a little bit later. I had mixed up the timing, so apologies for that. But I was fortunate enough to also listen to Lira, and I would just start with congratulating on organizing this conference. I think it's very, very timely and it's very important. As you mentioned, I have the privilege of being the chair of the Working Party on Responsible Business Conduct at the OECD, and the Ukraine is an adherent to the OECD guidelines, and this is one of the reasons why from the very first moment we have been very engaged with Ukraine and also, of course, with the terrible situation as it stands right now. And just to give you a bit of context, when I started the discussion with colleagues after the invasion of Ukraine, one of the most often heard replies was, not now, especially with businesses, not now. We have other things to deal with. We cannot deal with responsible business conduct or with human rights in a situation like that. We need to get our staff out of the country. We need to make sure that we're still in business. I do think, and you saw that also in our policy brief, this is the wrong answer. It's very important to stick to the standards, to stick to consider business and human rights agenda during these times, and particularly in times of conflict. Now, to your question on the CSDDD, the OECD has not been officially involved, but of course we discussed with colleagues a lot. And for us, the key issue was really what Lira also mentioned, coherence. Coherence is a very abstract term, and what it means is that we really want to see the new directive in line with the UN guiding principles, with the OECD guidelines. And this is not about taking a position as an organization. This is about substance. At the end of the day, what we want to see is an impact on the ground, an impact in people's lives. And we will only see that impact if standards and rules for businesses are clear. Least thing we need is an abundance of standards that are kind of similar, but go in different directions. And this is why we are very pleased that the directive builds on the due diligence framework as it has been developed in the UN guiding principles and then taken up by the OECD guidelines and further developed. And I should just emphasize that we are really aligned with the UN guiding principles. So there's no difference between the two instruments. You could really think it's a bit like wearing different glasses. If you take the UN guiding principles, you focus very clearly on human rights. If you take the UN guiding principles, we more or less copy pasted the human rights chapter from the UN guiding principles, but there are other topics like the environment, like corruption. So it's the same approach, the same due diligence, but it's broader. And if you then add the international labor organizations, it's like changing glasses again, and you focus on labor rights. So please keep that in mind throughout the next couple of days, that we're really talking about a family of instruments that are aligned. So don't play one against the other. So this is the good news, that we do have this building on existing standards in the directive. And then, of course, as Lira mentioned, it sometimes goes in different directions, but what is there is essentially aligned with the standards. And this is very important for due diligence. Now, your question about what to do as a company, how to get started. Very often I hear the reply, and I'm sure Lira will agree, that companies tell me, oh, it's so complicated. I don't even know where to start. So let's wait a moment and see what comes from the Commission, what kind of guidance we get. And my first piece of advice would really be, don't overcomplicate things. The most complicated step is actually to get started. And in the companies I work with and where we have seen a lot of success, these are the companies that would stay, let's just take one step at a time, and let's start with an issue that we all know what we're talking about. And depending on the industry that you are engaged in, this can be a different topic. So if you're in textile, for example, usually labor issues are very prominent. So it's a wise idea to start with an issue that is very clear throughout the company. It's something we need to keep an eye on. And once you have chosen that issue, and generally I would really advise to not pick the most complex issue to get started, but pick a familiar issue, something you can count on, that your middle management will say, yeah, really, that is an issue. So, and I'm just using this example of labor rights. And then to get started, the first question is, what are we doing what do we know about labor standards in our supply chain? So it's a question, and it's a factual question. You want to know what is going on. And by asking that question, you are already in the first step of the UNGP and OECD guidelines due diligence framework. And of course, if you're the person starting the process, you need to be familiar with that framework. And that would really be my most important advice, to get started with the international instruments. If you use the UNGPs, if you work on human rights, if you use the OECD guidelines, if it's environment or corruption or other things, you can't go wrong, because at the moment we have to wait what comes from member states, what comes from the Commission, but waiting also means losing time. And if as a company, you're really in a position where you think you have nothing, the time to get started is now. So bring together a few people that are willing to engage and start with a familiar issue and then apply the due diligence framework to that familiar issue. And while you're doing so, you will encounter very practical questions. You will have to think, okay, whom do we need to talk to find out what's going on in our supply chain? If, for example, we have T-shirts being produced in Bangladesh, do we have people we can talk to in Bangladesh? If we have products from Uzbekistan, do we have stakeholders? And just by asking these questions, you are in the middle of conducting due diligence. So this is a very important first step. And once you have done that and you get a more or less clear picture on what is going on, and again, this is a factual question. It's not about blaming anybody in the company who did wrong at what time. It's really getting the facts right. And then you will see we may have a problem somewhere, or we may not have enough information. And then you start developing a policy. Where do we want to go? What is our policy? Of course, in line with the international instruments. And in doing so, the process normally develops quite naturally. And one of the key elements, and I would say key ingredients for success, is really to engage stakeholders at a very early stage in as comprehensive a manner as possible. And then there are, as Lera already mentioned, there are instruments to support you. There are programs. We have regional programs, for example, in the OECD. There are papers, guidances, instruments you can benefit from, and again, stakeholders. And in many countries, if the country that you're talking to, or if it's Ukraine, you can also turn to the national contact point. The national contact point, I know it's a bit of an awkward name. It's the National Contact Point for Responsible Business Conduct, which doesn't make it catchier really, but at least you know what it is all about. The National Contact Point is also there to give advice and support and point you to the direction where more resources can be found. I think I'll leave it at that for the moment so that we have enough time then for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Christina. And yeah, we also want to go a little bit deeper about corporate sustainability due diligence directive. And today, Bill Beckendorf represents Business and Human Rights Resource Center. And actually, Business and Human Rights Resource Center, we appreciate very much all work what Business and Human Rights Resource Center is doing, in particular in the context of the war in Ukraine, but also in, of course, in much more broader context on business and human rights, and in particular on corporate sustainability due diligence directive. So, dear Bel, thank you very much for joining us today. And I would like to give the floor to you to overview the key messages of corporate sustainability due diligence directive, what we should expect.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and also to the organizers and the participants. I'm grateful to have joined this roundtable today to this very important and timely event. Please allow me to say a few words about the Resource Center. Additionally, we work with everyone to advance human rights in business, and among other things, we collect data on the human rights policy and the performance of over 10,000 companies in over 180 countries. And by sharing this information publicly, we encourage transparency and accountability in business practices. And we also, for example, the Europe team cover regulatory developments on, for example, the CSDDD. The existing voluntary frameworks in business and human rights, such as the UN Guiding Principles and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, continue to be of utmost importance. Research has additionally shown, however, that mandatory frameworks are also needed to ensure that companies integrate sustainability into their operations. Often companies relied on social audits rather than meaningful change in their operations. In a public consultation in 2021, for example, companies themselves also agreed regarding the question on mandatory due diligence that an EU legal framework was needed, also to have more coherence for the companies within the European Union. There have also been first positive examples that we can see that business are positively introducing change into their practices due to the mandatory legislation in Germany and France, which was already implemented before the CSDDD. The British Institute for International and Comparative Law has done a one-year research on this already and has seen changes in corporate practices and foresees this for the CSDDD for European and non-European companies as well. So now I will dive a bit deeper into the CSDDD. Member states have until July 2026 to transpose the directive into national law. From then, the rules will start to apply to companies with a gradual phase in between 3 and 5 years after entry into force. Thus, we do expect some differences in the member states due to the transposition process, as they are reacting to their different needs in the countries, but we are working for all states to implement the CSD consciously and as broadly as possible. Additionally, we also see that other countries outside the European Union are starting to implement complementary legislations, such as Switzerland. We have seen that they have restarted the discussion on their mandatory due diligence law. Also, of course, on the global level, there's the discussion on the binding treaty. The CSDDD sets out corporate due diligence duties for European and non-European companies that fall within its scope to identify and address adverse human rights and environmental impacts. Unfortunately, as Christine and Lira also just mentioned, while the UNGPs and OECD guidelines expect companies to respect all human rights under the CSDDD, it is not the case for the CSDDD. For the CSDDD, it is not the case. Companies will need to undertake due diligence regarding certain specific rights and certain international conventions that are featured in a designated list of the law, rather than, for example, including collective rights that are also in the UNGPs. Regarding the business activities, the CSDDD introduces the concept of chain of activities, which defines the scope that all upstream activities are covered, such as the supply of raw materials, manufacturing and sourcing, while downstream activities are singled down to storage, transport and distribution. These due diligence requirements follow a risk-based approach, and on the other hand, companies can prioritize their actions if they cannot address all impact at once. Like Christine said, they can start with addressing some impacts, but they also have to adopt appropriate measures and identify and address adverse impacts. Regarding conflict-sensitive due diligence, recital 30b underscores the particular geographic and contextual risk factors associated with business activities in conflict-affected and high-risk areas. It requires different approaches to the due diligence than in other area. The approach is grounded in an understanding of the conflict itself and how business activity may inadvertently contribute or can be linked to conflict dynamics. Thus, it here requires an analysis of human rights risks and impacts that is layered over the analysis of conflict risks and impacts. The results of these complementary analyses are then used to elaborate strategies for addressing the company's conflict risks and impacts and its human rights risks and impacts, including any actions that the company must take to remediate such. If companies do not comply, which was already mentioned, there are now civil liability clauses offering access to justice for rights holders, but also meaningful stakeholder engagement, which is necessary now. A big question we get asked a lot is how it falls with the scope of other EU regulation. The Commission clarified that the CSDDD complements other EU initiatives to protect human rights and the environment, such as the deforestation regulation and the forced labor regulations. And the CSDDD also cross-references other existing legislations, such as the reporting directive, to avoid duplication for companies in the scope of both rules. and also the EU Whistleblower Directive to protect company workers when reporting a breach. Lastly, on companies such as SMEs, which are excluded, and also EU and non-EU companies that do not fall under the scope of the directive, they do not have obligations and cannot be subject to public enforcement or civil liability under the directive. However, they may be indirectly affected if they are indirect or direct business partners in the chains of activities of larger companies in scope. As such, they may receive requests to collect and share information on adverse actual or potential impacts and to address in line with the company's obligations and scope. Here, the Commission, to protect SMEs and minimize any financial or administrative burden, because this is not the duty of these companies, the directive includes both provisions aimed at supporting them and safeguards against shifting the compliance burdens by large companies. Here, the CSDDD requires member states and the Commission to provide information and support, including financial support, to build SMEs' capacity. Companies whose business partners are SMEs are also encouraged and in some cases required to help comply with due diligence measures, with training and financial investments for these companies. So they can be supported in their endeavors. And they can also choose, these SMEs can also choose to conduct their own due diligence and use it for other business partners, but are always encouraged to use the help of the companies in scope of the CSDDD. I think I will leave it at that now, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Belle. And yeah, I would like to remind to all our participants that if you have questions, please put them in chat, and also our participants in the audience, please, if you have questions, we will have some time to respond. Я перейду на українську. На жаль,
And now I would like to speak English. Unfortunately, Mr. Melnichenko was asked to attend the meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. It means that now we can somehow wind up this session, and we have time in order to discuss the role of the national contact point of OECD in Ukraine, the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine. And I have a question to Marina Kupchuk. How the responsible conduct of business is reflected in the recovery programs of Ukraine, and rather it is reflected in general? And what are the next steps? How these programs can be implemented if the responsible business conduct is mentioned there? Good afternoon. Good morning, dear participants. Good morning, dear online participants. And I would like to express our gratitude to the organizers of this conference for this roundtable discussion and for the opportunity to participate in this discussion and to tell you about our activities. And the importance of this topic as the implementation of the responsible business conduct and the company's activities. Yes, integration of responsible business conduct into recovery programs. Dear online participants, do you hear me now? Please somehow give me a sign. Yes, we do hear you well, Marina. So integration of responsible business conduct is international policy into recovery programs are very important, particularly considering Ukrainian integration into the EU. I would like to say that we have been doing it since 2012, when we established our national contact point, when we joined the OECD declaration, including the OECD guiding principles. And the implementation of those standards into the policy is one of the tasks. And actually, it is one of the tasks for our national contact point. So the national contact point is the institution that implements the OECD guidelines, enhances their effect, considers complaints regarding the breach of those guidelines. And actually, one of the tasks nowadays is to assist the government with the implementation and developing of these standards and their implementation into the national policy. Since 2017, we have several bills have already been adopted where those standards have been integrated. I'm talking the national standard strategy on human rights that includes a chapter about human rights observation during the commercial activities, and the Ministry of Economy has developed the concept on the development of social responsible business in Ukraine till 2030 and the action plan on strategy implementation. I would like to mention that those two acts definitely have to be implemented, and we have already started doing it. I'm talking about the National Strategy on Human Rights, and also we plan to implement the concept and our action plan. It is one of our priority tasks for today. Also, in 2023, we adopted the strategy on the external political activity of Ukraine, and it presupposes enhancement of our cooperation with OECD. In particular, it provides for implementation of OECD standards in Ukraine and expanding the status of Ukraine and the participation of Ukraine as a member of this organization. It means that since 2023, one of the key documents for us was the OECD program for Ukraine, and there was also action plan regarding this program. And the action plan presupposes that Ukraine adopts some other guidelines and recommendations of OECD and joins some other units of OECD. And definitely the action plan is implemented. And within these activities, we also do analysis of the national policies. And the Ministry of Economy is engaged into all these initiatives and into all these activities. One of the important documents for us is the Ukraine Facility Plan, and this plan also addresses the issue how the company will be involved in due diligence process in relation to human rights. And this is something that defines the competitiveness of the company, the possibility for the company to get integrated in the global markets, and generally is one of the key components regarding the Ukraine's integration into the EU. Recently, we have adopted the strategy for SMEs development, and we have also contributed to the development of this strategy. And it is important to mention that the strategy also mentions the provision about the necessity for SMEs to implement their responsible business conduct standards, and it stresses the role of the government the support to SMEs, and the government should provide support and clarification and explanation of such tools to those companies. I have already mentioned, and the previous speakers have already mentioned, that these are actually big challenges for business, and the role of the government in this regards is really crucial. And it is really important to provide support to the companies in any way. And we really have to rely on the experience of our national contact point. Since 2017, we have already had and gained some experience because we communicate with our foreign partners and we are members of the working group on responsible business conduct. And in this context, it is really important to provide our support and to ensure that we provide support to the companies.
And another important document that was adopted not that long ago is the Environmental Compact, which is the recommendations of the government regarding responsible recovery and remediation. And we lay great expectations on the action plan that will be adopted to fulfill this Environmental Compact. And within it, we will focus on the development of the national action plan regarding the implementation of responsible business. And in this context, what really matters is to unite all those action plans for them to correspond to each other. And we actually intend to engage everyone, all the stakeholders in the development of this plan for the years to come. Well, for the moment, these are the documents developed with the engagement of the Ministry of Economy, and I also know that there are some initiatives of other ministries, like the Ministry of Finance, which has also developed the strategy for reporting, non-financial reporting. That is also the National Bank's strategy, but unfortunately, we were not engaged in the development of those initiatives. But we engage the National Bank and the Ministry of Finance in taking some initiatives. And I hope that all these joint efforts will contribute to further joint work and to further activities of the central executive authorities and also local executive authorities. They will act further to not just have a government level, national level projects, but we will also have local level projects because companies are working there and they need to be supported by the local government in the implementation of those standards. So I think that the role of the national focal point, and in particular the guiding principles of the OECD, are really important in the context of the directive because they offer a model for doing due diligence by companies. And for the moment, for the time being, it is one of the models suggested by the international standards. Thank you. Thank you, Marina. We've got some questions in our chat. Well, one of the participants has aptly asked us what companies fit within the directive. We have forgotten to mention what the scope of the directive is. You know, the idea of the directive is to change the mindset of all businesses. And this idea originated from the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which say that respect for human rights should be introduced and manifested by all companies, by all businesses, regardless of the size, the sector of this business, and the area where this business functions. But directly, the directive covers the scope of only large companies, corporations. And as Lira mentioned, this directive resulted from a compromise. And this compromise was that the directive includes the scope of large corporations only. These are the EU corporations with the annual turnover of 450 million euros. If they comply with this criteria, have been complying with this criteria for the latest 2 financial years, and they must have more than 1,000 employees. For companies from non-EU member states, the criteria of employees is not applicable. It's only this criteria of 450 million euros that they got in the EU, not generally in the world, globally, but in the EU. And it's also questionable how the EU is going to make those calculations, but this is already a technical issue. And let me remind you, dear participants, once again that it was thanks to the UNDP that we have finally got the first Ukrainian informal translation of the directive. And we've also got the translation, the Ukrainian translation of the answers to frequently asked questions related to the directive. These answers were prepared by the European Commission, and you've already got access to those materials in Ukrainian. And also our partner, Danish Institute for Human Rights, has prepared several short brochures, just several page long brochures on the directive for stakeholders which do not represent the EU member states. So there is an information bulletin for companies, there is an information bulletin for civil society organizations, and there is another one for policymakers. So if you find a good equivalent for the policymakers in Ukrainian, it will be great, because we have really been arguing with the translators how to translate this notion into Ukrainian. We don't have a word like this. And they also prepared the information bulletin for another category I don't remember. This is highly useful information, because these are the bulletins specifically for target audiences. And here is another question in our chat. Let me open it, just a moment. It's a rather provocative question. The EU directive requires legislative changes in the Ukrainian legislation. Who is going to develop those changes and amendments? I will not give you any answer to this question, because this is the question that policymakers should be asked. But suppose there are no questions in the room. Yeah, regarding the implementation, I would just like to say that recently I've attended a meeting of the national focal points, and I would say that in the EU also nobody knows who is going to implement this, because the focal points are actively discussing this, but they understand that that may well be their responsibility, but that's a tricky question. Nobody is willing to deal with that. It's interesting because we've got many developments for the 27 EU member states regarding the implementation of the directive, but it's questionable who's going to do this in Ukraine. I know that the UNDP has some plans regarding this. They will know how they could apply an information and awareness raising approach to that. But our next session will be facilitated by Olena, so I think that you will speak on that. Suppose we don't have any further questions from the audience and we don't have any comments. This means that we may start another session, and after that we will have a coffee break. A coffee break will be where you were getting the bags at the registration desk, and then we'll come back to the final session. So now, first of all, let me express my gratitude to our great guests, speakers. I would also like to express my gratitude to the participants for good questions in the chat. And let me give the floor to Alana Matnik, who is a representative of the UNDP program, and she's an expert on business and human rights. Alana, you're very much welcome. Thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and thank you, dear participants, for joining us today in this discussion. I would like to start our discussion related to the expectations from companies and expectations of companies, the role of businesses, investors, and civil society organizations. And I would like to invite the speakers who will participate, because we will have two speakers who are online with us. And as far as I understand, we will have one offline speaker. So this is Dmitro Yakevets, representative of IPAM Ukraine, head of the EHD CSR direction. He's offline with us. Also, we have with us online Daria Nahayevska. Could you show our speaker So she's a researcher of the School of Business of the Aalto University from Finland, and she's also a consultant on responsible business conduct and an expert of the UNDP in business and human rights. And also we will have Jessica Johansson, who is the researcher of business, human rights, and the environment from Swedwatch from Sweden, and she will also join us online. So welcome to everyone, and I would like to split our discussion into two parts. The topic is expectations of companies and expectations from companies. And we understand that with the adoption of the directive, it became a kind of a generalization of the legislative developments in the EU in general, in the EU member states and globally, because the requirements for due diligence on human rights and the environment for business should be treated as legislative standards and requirements. And it's interesting to ask business, what are the challenges? What are the best practices that you can already share? Maybe you can share them with the companies that are only embarking on that path. And is there any need for assistance? Because we've been talking about policymakers. So what should the state do, or what should the state not do to support the companies that are trying to implement due diligence on human rights into their activity? And let me start with Metro. You're the representative of a large company which is really doing a lot in terms of responsible business conduct and social corporate responsibility. So could you please tell us how much ready you are for the requirements of the directive? Do you have any challenges that you can see, and what you are already doing in that respect? This is the first block of questions, and the second block of questions is, what are the expectations of the Ukrainian business regarding the state? What should the state do, or where should the state abstain from doing anything, from taking any steps? Just your ideas on that point. Thank you, Olena. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, thanks all the participants for giving me a chance to share our experience. I would like to broaden the framework because we're talking about due diligence in human rights, but actually we're talking about due diligence in the context of corporate responsibility and CSRD. So we are talking not just about financial reporting, but about non-financial reporting, about due diligence. And for us, these terms are not new for us as an international company because our internal policies do contain those requirements, at least most of them. Probably we could work on specific tools used for local level reporting, but globally, these are no new things. And these things are not strange for us. They do not make us surprised. When we're talking about sustainable development, it's more about ethics, which are generally useful for business. Since we're staying in Ukraine, and I am the head of the department in ESG department in Ukraine, we need to understand that human rights of people in Ukraine are violated by the Russian Federation that has invaded Ukraine. And now we, as business, as state, as the civil society sector, should deal with this remediation, which is mentioned by the directive as the result of the business actions. But these, in our context, this is not the result of our actions. We have to make up for what the aggressor is doing with our state and our business. Therefore, the challenges related to human rights and activity in the field of human rights will be kind of compensatory in our context. Since 2022, the whole ESG direction and the whole social corporate responsibility has changed drastically in Ukraine, and we can already state that business is manifesting not just due diligence, but over due diligence, extra due diligence from the point of view of the respect for human rights and respect for the employees that don't have an opportunity to perform their duties. It seems to me that these are basic things about extra vacations or remote online work or taking care of people during air alerts. So that is what reduces the profitability of business on a daily basis. And we cannot just demand it. We cannot make business do such things, but we can stimulate them. And why is ethics important here? Because this attitude of businesses to the employees, members of their families, and communities where they work will turn out to be profitable and beneficial for business in the long run. If we speak about supply chains, our vendors, our partners, from whom we rent out office premises have got contractual agreements with us, and they could be rather harsh about supply of power and organization of the work of offices. But they have been flexible, and we, together with them, have been looking for solutions of our problems to really meet the basic needs, which should not probably be voiced at conferences, but these are the challenges that we face the most. Well, if we speak about what the state could do and should do, at the previous panel, it was already mentioned that different stakeholders in different parts of their activity, in different lines of their activity, or in different areas, work in parallel. Sometimes we can see that we lack communication at the state level. So the whole idea of the directive is to synchronize and to harmonize. The idea of the directive is, and by the way, here I would like to thank our partners for the Ukrainian translation, because even that English form is too flexible. They have due diligence. They have then required level of risk assessment. And for our legislators, post-totalitarian legislators, this directive seems to be not too much specific. So what needs to be done? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is what we are normally asked about, to give this plan with several items. But I would say that this approach enables us to respect human rights with no indicative and formal approach, and until this is regulated at the national level. As far as expectations are concerned, well, it would be good if new legislation really harmonized the available with the existing one without creating any overburdening regulations and formal requirements that can be fulfilled. But, behind the large number of formal indicators, you will probably not be able to see this spirit at the core of sustainable development, which aims to harmonize business and to make business not just more successful, but more comfortable, both for business and for the civil public sector. Thank you. And I've got another question for you. You have mentioned vendors. And I've started thinking that this directive pays a lot of attention to how companies interact with their partners and what principles you're choosing business partners. Is there any assessment, not just in terms of the price offer of the partners, but the history of work of the partners, with whom they worked, where they work? Do you have any policies in place? Do you have any tools that you could share with the participants of our roundtable discussion? I mean, the tools that would help you identify risky partners. Do you pay attention to the issue of human rights in your contracts and agreements with partners? And maybe there are some other tools that you're currently using for this. Well, I will not say something new. We do have procurement policies, we have compliance policies, which presuppose some vendor check, and we apply those verification procedures not only to commercial contractors, but to the organizations to which we are providing help, like charitable funds, civil society organizations that we are assisting. And this check, well, depending on the scope of assistance and interaction, also includes the issue of due diligence. Why not for everyone? Because the in-depth vetting of every vendor, even for, in particular for SMEs, increases the operational load. And well, in our company, we have a separate business accounting unit that could be dealing with this. But for a small enterprise where they have 30 or 100 employees and they have just 3 administrative staff members, well, this company will find it difficult to do the due diligence absolutely for everyone. Well, the directive suggests a way to fix this problem, like regional associations and business associations, even civil society organizations, which may well be our next step in helping business, small business, which is quite often mentioned in this context, to engage to make use of large corporations to introduce systemic changes. For SMEs, a large global or national company is generating a major share of profit, well, I mean that businesses will listen more to those large corporations than to the national legislation, which unfortunately is much to be desired and can be interpreted in different ways. And, you know, you may expect 3 or 5 years of the transitional period, and then they think, okay, somehow we will do it. But as far as those checks are concerned, they include due diligence, and they include this due diligence not 100% the way the directive has it. But I think that this is more of the issue of the toolkit, so we will somehow regulate this. Another important issue is awareness raising and campaigns regarding the requirements of the directive for SMEs, because again, the directive offers several options. And if we get back to the state expectations, I would say that we are ready to work with our vendors. We are ready to work with the prospective vendors. But at the same time, it is important that we do not have any delays in the implementation of the national legislation, because our experience shows that from the moment when regulatory framework is passed until they are finally enacted, well, this period is really important, because if entrepreneurs know what they should be getting ready for, they are getting ready for that. But otherwise, if there is an amendment which presupposes quick transition with no additional awareness raising campaign, with no not a sufficient timeline for you to make mistakes and to learn by doing. So in this case, SMEs will definitely oppose this legislation. Thank you, Metro, for sharing your experience, and you have already made some suggestions for policymakers and for us and for the partners dealing with the support and promotion of responsible business practices in Ukraine. Thank you. And now I would like to go over to Daria Nahaevska. And when we are talking about the issue of expectations coming from companies, well, Daria is an expert here because she joined in a number of researches dedicated to responsible business conduct and business and human rights in Ukraine. So I've got 3 questions for Daria. The first question is, what are the risks? What are the challenges? And has anything changed after the full-scale invasion? And the second question is, again, going on with this full-scale invasion, should be mentioned that the directive contains a procedure of diligence in the context of conflict. And what do you think? Can the provisions of the directives work as a preventive mechanism for that, for such business practices that directly or indirectly have something to do with the military aggression that is taking place now? Well, these are 2 questions, and I will probably ask you the third question later. I will be really grateful if you provide your ideas. Thank you, Olana. Good morning, dear colleagues. Thank you for the invitation to this roundtable discussion. And let me mention that it's really true that when we're talking about the results of the general national surveys, it should be mentioned that the risks and the challenges related to business and human rights are still there. And well, this is a situation characteristics both of the time before the full-scale invasion and now. The main challenges include low awareness of business on this context of business and human rights and due diligence procedure. Business is better informed about what corporate social responsibility is, what is corporate volunteering is, but unfortunately, businesses normally don't know about this concept of respect for human rights. It's not something that Ukrainian companies are well aware of. And we don't have any recommendations from the state regarding the business conduct in the non-government control areas. And businesses are really facing some challenges when passing those decisions while working in those areas. So the recommendations coming from the profile ministries, from the government, from the local self-government bodies would be very much helpful for the businesses that work in local communities. And it can also be indicated that before the full-scale invasion, unfortunately, there was no discussion regarding the probable influence of business and the dynamics of the conflict. And for many companies that work in Ukraine and don't work with investors and international business, these cases have come as something new, and definitely the companies were not aware of what action plan they were supposed to fulfill. During the full-scale invasion, as Metro has already mentioned, definitely we have been facing an increase in the number of violations of human rights as a result of the full-scale invasion. And here we're talking about safety of staff and consumers and the labor violations that resulted from the liberalization of the national legislation. We may also speak about some intuitive actions of management and corporate volunteering that was not supported by politicians. And I fully agree with the statement voiced by Dmitro. He said that we could speak about business ethics and about the understanding of what is good to do, what is not good to do. But at the same time, we can see that some companies show best practices in this field, and development and introduction of such policies and procedures in companies is something that is based on the moral compasses of the management and the staff. And also during the full-scale invasion, we have seen that we need national legislation, we need national action plans. We don't see any line in the vision of the corporate business conduct, social business conduct during the times of war by the government. And definitely my colleagues from the UNDP mentioned that last year a study was made done into the responsible business conduct in times of war. And this report on the study contains more information about the challenges that can be traced when we're talking about doing entrepreneurial activity and the work of large business, including transnational corporations, having their headquarters abroad.
And regarding the second issue, the directive has a requirement to the company regarding responsible business conduct by using the procedure of enhanced due diligence and removing adverse impact on human rights and environmental activities. And Olana Ovarova has already mentioned that the directive encompasses not all the companies. Now we are talking about 6,000 European companies and about 900 companies which are non-EU residents. And the directive is a sort of a roadmap or framework, what is responsible business conduct. And it is important to to maintain dialogue with the state regarding the level of responsibility of every entity. When we are talking about responsible business conduct, there are certain areas of responsibilities of business associations, of the government, of the companies of different sizes present in different areas of the economy. Bigger companies definitely have more resources for due diligence issues, and we have to develop tools to provide support to SMEs regarding implementation of this procedure. And we also have the public request for due diligence implementation of business. For example, regarding the goods of dual usage. There is also the social request of the public for the companies of Russian origin to leave the Ukrainian market. And when we are talking about the conflict context and the directive and its implementation mechanism, we have to state that definitely the companies have to be engaged in due diligence activities, and the companies have to analyze whether their activities influence the dynamics of the conflict and whether their partners, the partners from their supply chain, again, are somehow involved, and whether they are involved in a business conflict, in this conflict, and whether it is necessary to stop business relationship with those companies from the supply chain. And again, the companies which have their headquarters in those countries where there is the legislation on due diligence are more inclined to demonstrate responsible business conduct in comparison with the companies that do not have this thing developed at the national level. It is also important to remember that the companies that do due diligence procedures publish their financial reporting actually enjoy more trust on the part of the government partners, investment partners, and other business partners. Therefore, it is an effective tool that allows you to avoid the situation when you contribute to the conflict, when you mitigate the negative influence on the environment, when you actually do everything in a responsible way and make a contribution to the sustainable development. Thank you, Daria. And the last question to you. You have mentioned that there is a sort of interrelation between where the office of the company is registered, for example, be it in the country that has already implemented the requirements to due diligence activities. And those companies actually demonstrate higher level of responsible business conduct. The question is, what could be the strategies that ensure that the requirements of the directive have influence and positive impact on people, on the local communities, and actually not become the formal procedures. So what should be done for the directive to become the driver of change, in particular when we are talking about change of business behavior? Within the context of the full-scale war of Ukraine and post-war recovery, I would mention close cooperation with the business associations, business investors, and other international partners assisting Ukraine on its way to recovery. Now, here we should talk about integration of due diligence requirements, and these requirements should become part of the investment portfolio of those partners. And definitely business associations should work with its members. And here we are talking about the formation of responsible business conduct culture and about general dialogue. When we shape the areas of responsibilities of every stakeholder of the process. when we are talking about global management, when we are talking about areas of responsibilities of the national governments, local self-governance and international stakeholders, they are a bit blurred. And sometimes stakeholders expect that somebody else would do the job. And today in the panel discussion, it has already been also mentioned that, for example, if the company is present in the local community may demand from the company provision of certain services to the local population. And the local community will probably avoid its own responsibilities regarding this issue. And as a result, there might be a conflict between the company and local population. So it's necessary to develop the framework of cooperation. And there should be the events similar to the one we are present at now. Thank you, Daria, for this very expanded answer, and thank you for the recommendations that definitely will be useful in the future in order to ensure effective implementation of the directive in Ukraine. Now I would like to give the floor to one more discussion of our roundtable. I'm talking about Jessica Johansson, who is a researcher of business, human rights, and the environment, representing Swedwatch organization. Jessica, thank you very much for joining our event today. There are two questions to you. Your organization is doing advocacy campaigns regarding human rights in the developing countries. And as far as I have understood, when the directive was adopted, you have prepared a document about the expectations of the Swedish government and what it should do in order to better implement the provisions of the directive. So could you please tell us about those expectations? And the second question, whether the due diligence issues and corporate sustainability is something that has already been implemented by Swedish companies, and how these issues are raised by the companies to their business partners in the developing countries or in any other countries where those companies are present.
Yeah. So hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'll just start by giving a little brief introduction on what Swedwatch does, so you know more or less where we fit in the whole network of people working on these issues. So my name is Jessica Johansson. I work at Swedwatch. Swedwatch is a non-governmental organization based in Sweden. We're an independent, non-for-profit research organization that works with rights holders at the center. And we work to promote responsible business practices, both on behalf of states and on businesses. So we do this via different measures. We have different research and investigations that we carry out together with CSOs in different parts of the world. We also do multi-stakeholder dialogues and engagement, both with civil society, with business actors, investors, government, etc. And we also conduct trainings on which different international frameworks that apply, and now also with the CSDDD, which different laws will apply in both the EU, but also for suppliers around the world. So in terms of what we expect when it comes to the transposition of the CSDDD, originally we were together with a group of other CSOs pushing for a bit of a more substantial and comprehensive version of the CSDDD. What we see now is a watered down version of the document. For instance, the finance sector is not included. The full value chain scope is not included. We have a more limited version than what was originally hoped for. There's also a smaller scope than what some of the civil society actors at least was proposing and pushing for. And part of why this happened is also that we had a quite strong lobby happening in the background for watering down the document. We're still very pleased to see the law passed, and the focus for now will be to monitor and push for an ambitious transposition from the EU level to the Swedish law, and also to push for that Sweden would go beyond the minimum requirements. While it's not very likely that this will happen, for instance, in including the finance sector or downstream due diligence, some of the areas where Sweden could potentially go beyond what's minimum required in the CSDDD is in cases of state-owned enterprises or public procurement, and also to really ensure that there is strong compliance on the elements of meaningful stakeholder engagement. And by that, we, as a very rights-based organization that have rights holders at the forefront, want to push for really avoiding these box-ticking exercises where civil society organizations or rights holders that are directly impacted by adverse environmental and human rights impacts are invited to the table, but only as a show. So that's something that we will be putting focus on. Something that is equally important in the transposition is to ensure effective implementation, monitoring, and compliance. So that involves key factors like civil liability, and also ensuring that there is a monitoring body and a sanctioning body that is strong, that has resources, and that is well equipped. This also includes proper access to justice. So we'll also be monitoring that the access to justice instrument is strong and implemented. And this includes not only the access to justice in terms of financial remediation, it can also be other remediation steps, like if there is an environmental adverse impact, to halt and reverse some of the impacts, for instance, in case of oil spills or so. But it also includes that the process should be accessible for rights holders and communities, workers, unions, indigenous groups that have been adversely impacted by some business activities. So it should be both an access to justice that is timely, that is not too expensive to access for rights holders, and that there's also available information. So we're gonna, this is some of the recommendations that we have for the policy process and the transposition. And to your second question, which was more about the preparedness of companies and what has already been done, or where the Swedish companies are standing now. Some companies have been very engaged in sustainability work for many years and are performing relatively well on some elements and others not. We also can say that many companies, at least the larger companies that will also now be in scope for the CSDDD, are already preparing and have started to implement the corporate sustainability reporting directive measures. And as some of you know, they are complementary, but it only constitutes one element of what will be required under the CSDDD. So while the CSRD and what some companies have already prepared for, that is the communication and the reporting elements. But under the CSDDD, companies will also need to comply with other human rights due diligence steps, like integrating due diligence practices into their policies, identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks and impacts, preventing harms from happening, and once harms happen, either halt them or mitigate, And in cases where harms have already occurred and when it's appropriate, also remediate. And last but not least, also monitor this progress. So there's a lot more steps than only the reporting side of things. And what we can see is that both at the EU level and at the Swedish level, there's still quite a long way to go, both when it comes to human rights due diligence, but also when it comes to general respect for environmental standards and human rights. Some good resources to mention is World Benchmark Alliance made a report on whether companies are ready for the EU supply chain law. And something that is really noticeable is that according to their data, 80% of the 2,000 most influential companies scored 0 when it comes to compliance on the steps of human rights due diligence. And only 20% of companies implement some form of human rights due diligence. It was only as low as 6% that actually fully implement human rights due diligence. So this is just like an initial picture of what it is at the EU level. And when you look at the Swedish level, while there is increased awareness of both human rights due diligence, but also other sustainability requirements, there is still a long way to go when it comes to implementation. From the same Benchmark Alliance, we can see that some of the Swedish 2,000 most the Swedish companies that are among these 2,000 most influential companies, there's still a quite low score when it comes to the social benchmarks, so those that deal with human rights compliance. And that's not very high, much higher than it is at the EU level. So I'd say that in terms of preparedness, there's still quite a long way to go. There are a difference when it comes to how much companies are aware of this, and also how much companies have signed on to the CSDDD. There was quite a lot of lobbying, but I also really want to mention that there was several really big Swedish companies that pushed the government to implement to adopt the CSDDD. Among these, IKEA, Volvo, H&M, and several other really large and big players. So there is also company support for this type of legislation in terms of leveling the playing field and aligning the CSDDD with established international human rights frameworks like the UNGPs.
Thank you very much for your very interesting data. And thank you very much for highlighting this issue. I'm talking about highlighting this difference between the level of awareness and what is really implemented in practice. And actually, this is something that also was a point for us here in Ukraine. Ukraine, as EU member state candidate, as well as other countries, members of the EU, will have to implement the requirements of the directive. So far, it is absent in the implementation package, but we expect it will be included there because it's a big layer of legislation. And this is the block of corporate legislation. And corporate legislation is included into EU Ukraine-EU integration track. So we have actually bilateral task how we can implement and extrapolate the directive into the level of the Ukrainian national legislation. So this is the task for the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine, for the Ministry of Environment of Ukraine, that are responsible for the social responsible business and protection of the environment. So what model should be taken? How it is possible to support the big companies? How it is possible to support SMEs, which probably do not have enough funding and do not have enough resources and do not probably have that level of awareness as the big companies. And at the same time, we already have certain businesses that work at the EU market that have already their partners among the European companies. So what they should do, how they have to enhance their activities, and how can they be on the same level as their European counterparts. For example, how to ensure that they are chosen as business partners and not their competitors. So the first small initiative that probably would address these issues both from the viewpoint of state policy and from the viewpoint of companies was the survey among Ukrainian companies. The question was whether they are ready to implement the provisions of the directive and what resources and support they need in order to do this. And this initiative is implemented with the support of UNDP and with the support of the global UN agreement in Ukraine. We also were supported by the government of Ukraine and Dear Business. So this is the survey for the Ukrainian companies operating in Ukraine, and it is aimed at understanding whether there are certain gaps, whether there are certain challenges. Probably some Ukrainian companies have already been implementing the requirements of the directive and actually have nothing to do because everything is already in place. Therefore, if you have your colleagues or if you represent business companies, please participate in this survey because it will give us some understanding what should be done regarding government policies development and support programs. This survey is part of a bigger survey conducted by the UNDP at the level of the region, and Olena Uvarova is an expert of this big regional survey. We can say that this directive is a big change, is a big legislative change, and at the global level, we definitely expect to get more information about the companies operating beyond Ukraine and whether the gaps at the level of implementation and knowledge exist, and if they exist, how we can remove these gaps. Dear participants, thank you for discussion. Petro, Daria, and Jessica, thank you for participating in our discussion, being our speakers. We do hope we'll be able to get answers to the survey I have just distributed. I have a question. Well, I understand that the discussion will go on and we shall discuss those issues in the second part of the day. But when we are talking about practices, positive and negative business practices, very often we have heard this word today. I'm talking about business practices. So my question is to Dmytro. Partially, we have raised this question at Kharkiv Legal Forum, and I have asked this question to one of the lawyers of big IT company, and I didn't like her answer. It was actually about human rights and due diligence and human rights. So coming back to IT companies, Mr. Dmytro, could you please tell us about such a practice which is now very much discussed considering the case law of the Constitutional Court? I'm talking about drawing up the contract relationship in the companies as for example, civil contracts with the individual entrepreneurs. It means the company takes on a person who is an individual entrepreneur. This is very much developed among the IT companies. So I'm talking about our national companies because the foreign partners do not actually like it. But instead of labor relationships, the new people are taken on as the entities of entrepreneurial activities. Why is it done? In order to reduce tax load. At least it is one of the explanations. But the point is that the rights of the individual entrepreneur is the activity at his or her own risk, while labor relationship is more protected issue. So what is your own attitude to this, and what is the situation in your company? Thank you for the question. Finally, we have started discussing something very specific. Well, this is the sensitive topic. I'm talking about such form of cooperation. Well, it's definitely not only about IT companies. Tourist industry is working in the same way, and this is definitely one of the tax avoiding schemes or tax evasion schemes, and really big international companies do not like it. Regarding IT companies, there is a special taxation regime, DSCT, and the companies can have this labor relationship with the employer. So the employer will be the individual entrepreneur. So some taxation, some taxes are paid by the individual entrepreneur and some taxes are paid by the company. There was an agreement with the IT sector, and the agreement was supposed to last for 20 years. Now this agreement is being modified, and we all understand why. Coming back to this directive, it has different issues regarding labor relationship. Who is considered to be the employed worker? And again, we are talking about the turnover of the company and not about the number of people working in the company. Talking about the human rights and the rights of the employees. Well, we are talking about short-term practices. And well, once again, we cooperate mainly with the individual entrepreneurs, and one individual entrepreneur may cooperate with different companies. Sometimes it is the choice of the employee. A person does not want to be the employed staff. So on the one hand, we respect the choice of the worker, and again, definitely, it is better to have an employed person to be a staffed employee, because this person will have better loyalty, will have all the rights protected. For example, lots of people who were evacuated from Kharkiv actually wanted to still be on be the employed staff of our company. And that was one of the reasons why lots of our people who were our official staff, still stayed in Ukraine. The key point is that all businesses and all companies should understand that the respect for human rights is something that pays you off in long-term perspective. So implementation of all the policies and rules and practices is something mandatory. Probably, well, we have about 9,000 workers of our company, and there are always people who will say, well, this thing is written, and we all the time may show where it's written. And well, it's good when you have a document, when the document actually stipulates your activities. Whether we are talking about the forms of employment, and for example, a person says, I want to be individual entrepreneur, but we say, for example, that this position is available only for staff workers. Well, we have to remember that the respect for human rights is really something good and is really cost effective for businesses. This is the key point. I would like to provide some comment here because it's a good example. Last year, a special UN reporter, Surya Deva, who in the past was the member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, published a report about the role of business in the right for development. And this report actually covers the situation when the business, for example, does not due diligence on human rights or corporate due diligence. But the point is that the business is a part of structural inequality in many societies. And the business is actually aware of this fact. And it seems to me the example of Ukrainian society is like this. On the one hand, I really like the IT sector because IT sector can boast of many good practices. But on the other hand, I see that IT sector enjoys certain privileges. The state is interested in supporting IT sector. And in order to keep IT sector in Ukraine, this sector is offered certain privileged conditions. And again, the IT sector, for example, pays less taxes. Dear business has been developed first and foremost for IT sector, and people in IT sector get salaries which are much higher than the average salary, and therefore they pay one of the taxes which is much lower. And again, you have mentioned that the people in IT sector have a right to choose whether they want to be the individual entrepreneur or want to be or have to sign the contract. And it is not the situation for the other people in Ukraine. So you are definitely interested in having this business model. It's understandable why it's so, and it's a systemic issues. But at the same time, we see how IT sector works in terms of lobbying certain initiatives. You are a strong part of policy making system in Ukraine. And it's the question whether you introduce this approach into your policy making. When we are talking about distribution of benefits in the society. Sometimes you act with good due diligence, but if we take the right for development, it looks like we have very unequal distribution of positive things in society. I'm not blaming IT sector for this, but the fact that IT sector is part of this structural and systemic inequality is really in place. Well, you have mentioned me, so I would probably like to give the answer. Well, I would probably disagree that we are, we agree with that we are partially the example of this structural inequality. Well, there are certain positions in our sector that allow a person to be individual entrepreneur, and there are positions that do not allow this. Again, regarding some taxes, this is our social responsibility, and the taxes are paid from the full salary. The tax is paid from the full salary, and the like a certain tax is paid by the company, and we are interested in paying this tax, and we all the time communicate this point, and well, we are interested in having the situation like this. Our expenditures are okay for us because we are interested in retaining these people. Well, I do agree that there is some dysregulation, and whether business or IT sector will manage it. It is important to have good and clear rules which are the same for everybody. Because the IT sector was developing very quickly and with some deregulation, now we are in a bit of privileged position, and we are ready to help others achieve the same level. Or we are ready to become participants of the general system. There are certain steps taken in this regard. It is important to ensure that the system is sustainable, transparent, and equal for everybody, and business will manage it. And we know it from the experience of our colleagues from other sectors. It is important to have the same rules for everybody, to have transparent rules, and for these rules not to be politically or not to be affected by certain political issues. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Alla Sanchenko. I represent the Institute of Economic and Political Research, and I'm the head of the Unit for Human Rights in the area of economy. I also have a question to Dmitro and to everybody who's present here and who represents business. Marina Kopchuk has just mentioned that in Ukrainian policy, we already have certain developments regarding improving the situation in business, improving the social responsibility of business. And it is happening due to our accelerated efforts regarding joining the EU. And in October, the Cabinet of Ministers adopted the strategy on corporate reporting on sustainable development. My question is, and actually I'm coming back to those words of Helena Uvarova, IT industry is the center of policymakers. So, for example, did your corporation participate in developing this strategy? Were you consulted about this strategy? Are you ready to implement the provisions of this strategy? This strategy presupposes reporting on the basis of European reporting standards. Thank you. Yes, we have been involved, but indirectly through IT association. The strategy was developed with certain economic associations, including IT association. Talking about corporate reporting, we already report on the basis of European legislation, particularly when we are talking about our allocations in Europe. And again, I'm talking about certain public reporting. Our company provides reporting every quarter, and I'm talking about non-financial indicator. Ukrainian location, probably there will be a special report for our legal entity based here in Ukraine. The very report, well, probably is less important because there is a quite long transition period, particularly for financial institution, in order to stimulate transition to green economy. But in general, it is good that we not only implement reporting, but also tangible approaches. According to our internal policies, according to our code of ethics and some other documents, these approaches are implemented. But the only thing we have to do is to ensure that we reflect that these approaches are visible. Talking about recommendations offered by us, I may voice them right now. Well, you have to approach to use sustainable approaches at the same time, and we have to avoid the situation when there are different experts saying different things. For example, some experts say that you have to introduce, for example, the directive regarding corporate sustainability, and then some experts come and say something else, and then some others say something else. Now we see the entire situation. We see the entire palette in the directive, and the implementation stage probably will take several years. So let's plan this implementation both at the national level, at the level of cooperation with business, for us to see what will be the next steps, for us to avoid fragmented approach, because otherwise we'll really be tempted to do it just on paper, report something, have 100 policies and procedures, but have nothing in place. So it's better to use the comprehensive approach.
The national economic strategy, please speak to the mic. Yes, sorry. Well, I agree. I'm satisfied with your answer. Definitely, it is great that such companies as your company and other colleagues of yours are joining the policy-making direction in Ukraine. It's good that they really can influence what will be happening in this direction based on your personal experience. And I also agree that it's better not to have separate policies, but it's rather better to have strategic vision. And let me emphasize that the national economic strategy introduced in 2021 is this comprehensive sort of strategic document, but unfortunately we don't have the action plan for it. We just have some specific movements along different lines of activity, which is not so good. Thank you. I would also like to ask Dmytro a question. As far as I know, IPAM is still functioning in Belarus. So let me ask you about your experience from the point of view of working with human capital that you have there, from the point of view of business and human rights. I know that there was some redundancy, people were relocated or they were dismissed. So what is your short-term and long-term vision of working with your human capital in this location? Thank you for the question. Well, for the time being, we are not developing our location in Belarus, our office in Belarus. I cannot actually speak on the global level, but as far as the operational transactions are concerned, so we are relocating our staff to the European Union. We are facing some challenges in this regards. And as far as strategic development, we are also facing some challenges. And I can tell you that as for now, we are actively discussing what our model should be in this respect. Well, if we need to leave some location, we need to still protect our staff members, their family members, and to assure them a survival mode in the context where they are working. I think that a good example here could be the way we exited from the Russian Federation. We fully closed our activities in the Russian Federation, which also affected our business model. And anyway, in any case, the support of Ukraine's companies and its rights to independence, its right to reach its borders of 1991 is manifested in that way. We have a 100 million fund of support for Ukraine, which focuses on our staff members, on their family members, but also on the communities where they live. And over the period from 2021, we have supported more than 51 civil society organizations providing humanitarian aid and other assistance. That's why the issue of human rights in the context of unprovoked aggression of the Russian Federation in Ukraine is something that really matters for us. Unfortunately, we live in the global world, and this may not happen overnight. You cannot stop your interaction with any location just at the click of the button, and we can even see it at the state level. We still have a number of forced economic ties that are still there. Thank you. Well, I think that this is the end of our discussion, and let me invite you to a coffee break, and then we will have another final discussion. We are waiting for you here after the coffee break. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm happy to welcome all those who are back. I hope that everyone has had his or her coffee, because that's what you definitely need to have in Lviv. And we are getting back to the final discussion with a very interesting topic, and we have just discussed with Olena. Will responsible companies gain any competitive edges in the domestic and European markets? And that's what we're going to speak about. I'm Irina Fedorovich, the national UNDP expert and the trainer on discrimination and non-discrimination. These are the topics I've long been working on. And I've also promised to Dmitros that he will not be the only IT representative who will get all the questions. So you will have a chance to ask questions to another IT specialist. So let me now invite the following people to join me. These are Natalia Karpanchuk-Konopatska, the president of the Women's Business Chamber of Ukraine, the head of International Cooperation Development and of the Committee for the Development of Women's Entrepreneurship of the Lviv Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And we have also mentioned Lviv Chamber of Commerce and Industry in the break. We will have Daria Ruban, who is the Business Integrity and Human Rights Lead, the UN Global Compact in Ukraine. Daria will be online with us. I can already see her in the screen. We are also supposed to have Yuri Tarkovska, Sustainability Manager at SoftServe, the IT expert I have promised you will have. And we're supposed to have Olena Sluzanska-Ivansky, the teacher of the Sustainable Business Management in the Business School of the Ukrainian Catholic University. And Olena is also supposed to be with us online. I wonder if you could show her in the screen. Olena, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We were also supposed to have Vladimir Kuzo, Deputy Chairman of the Board of Bank Lviv, the former Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine, but he has been called to the National Bank for a meeting, so he will not be here. Though actually, I wanted to start with asking him a question because Volodymyr has been a long-standing partner of UNDP, representing the Ministry of Economy. Last year, we launched a conference on sustainable business conduct with him. He spoke a lot and he did a lot to promote OECD standards and responsible business. It was interesting to learn his experience from transition from the civil service to the other side. But I hope that anyway, we will have this discussion with him one day. Now, we will have this female partnership, female leadership, which is a pleasure to see. And my first question will be for Daria. Daria, you are working with business in the Global Compact, and what is your view of the readiness of companies to implement responsible business conduct principles and standards? Does business realize what competitive edges they may gain? Do businesses already tell you that they have already gained some competitive advantages? Thank you, and welcome to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity provided to me to join in the discussion. I'm Daria Ruban. I'm the Business Integrity and Human Rights Lead in the UN Global Compact in Ukraine. Our organization has more than 24,000 participants from more than 160 countries of the world, which shows how supportive the international community is of this anti-corruption and integrity direction. In the Ukrainian office, we have 137 staff members, and this is a very good platform for the integration of the advanced standards of social responsibility and sustainable business. So what I can tell now is that we are more than just an initiative. That is, we are the symbol of our joint responsibility to the society in our striving to create a better world. So let me get back to the question. We think that responsible companies that are actively implementing the European standards, in particular in the field of human rights, labor relations, environmental sustainability, and so on, are becoming attractive for the European partners. In particular, they promote quick integration of Ukraine. That's why we promote this among our Ukrainian companies. Our companies are already getting integrated into this field. They're integrating international standards using the tools that we provide them with. We have noticed that it's really true that the level of development and implementation of those policies is different with different businesses. That's why we give an opportunity to Ukrainian businesses to raise their awareness. And this approach allows our company to better and quicker get adjusted to the EU requirements. in particular to the requirements of the CSDDD. Why is it relevant for the Ukrainian society and what is generally happening now? Let me give you an example of one company which is a member of the Global Compact in Ukraine. It has 50,000 staff members. 5,000 of them have been recruited for the military service, which is 1/10. The company is paying salaries to its employees while they are in the army, and after demobilization, each employee is actually facing a number of challenges. How to help a person with legal issues, how to help a person with medical issues, medical care and medical services, because there may be a lot of physical and psychological challenges. How do we help the families of the demobilized persons? Sometimes that is too much of a task for one company. That's why companies are developing special programs for retraining of the staff to adjust them to the modern Ukrainian reality, which means that besides the requirements coming from Europe, we also have some local challenges and local requirements. That's why last year our organization launched a new line of direction, which is development of educational programs on human rights for local businesses. And this program does not just provide an opportunity for businesses to identify the risks and to develop policies on human rights in compliance with European requirements, but it also is a step towards changes, towards the development of the culture in which every employee, every consumer would feel that their rights are respected. We consider different topics like barrier-free environment, inclusion in war times, and our goal is to create a society that would be modern and open for everyone. And when we invite businesses to join our trainings, we mainly stress the following advantages. The first one is the reputation and trust. Responsible business evokes trust on the part of investors and consumers, and this enables the business to expand onto new markets. Also, risks are reduced because this investment into sustainable development and human rights minimizes the risks related to reputational losses or some failures in the supply chain. And the last but not least is improvement of the conditions of cooperation, because the businesses that comply with the European and international standards, in particular in the field of human rights, may well expect some benefits, some simplified access to finance, better crediting terms, and long-term partnerships. Thank you. And my second question to you is a follow-up question. If we speak about non-financial reporting, how are those requirements of the guiding principles related to the directive? And is there any demand for learning about those requirements? Remember that in the morning we said that there are some sets of standards. This is not just one set. And quite often companies get confused. They don't know whether they have to follow the OECD standards or some other standards and how to get clear about that. And there are also 3 EU directives. Yes, it's really a very relevant question for our businesses that are members of the Global Compact, because there are too many standards and they may all be confused. Non-financial reporting, well, the standards of the UN Global Conduct in this respect have a direct link to the institutions, because all those elements of reporting constitute the basis for sustainable development. And CSDDD makes it binding for the companies to integrate sustainability requirements into their activities and to report on the fulfillment of this task. And this actually helps with following other tools of reporting. We are now cooperating with the European Parliament in trying to unify the reporting, because non-financial reporting is an obligatory element of membership in the UN Global Compact. And you know that the recent European legislation also requires reporting for large companies already now. And these norms will be disseminated further on, and then will also become valid for SMEs. That's just a matter of time. But if we speak about the possibility of development of different policies, well, this is important. That's why we are providing some tools both to large corporations And here we are trying to also engage SMEs for them to have the sufficient resources to raise the awareness of the importance of non-financial reporting. I think that we should also indicate it here that for SMEs that work in the EU or cooperate with the European partners, compliance with the non-financial reporting standards is becoming important not just from the point of view of regulatory requirements, but also from the point of view of improvement of their competitive edges, which is another advantage that we promote within the UN Global Compact. And CSDDD does not just raise some requirements for non-financial reporting, but for accomplishment of some practical deliverables in the field of sustainable development. And that's why support of educational programs help understand those requirements and fulfill them in practice, not just in theory. And in the long run, that will definitely improve the reputation and the trust among all the stakeholders. Thank you. And since we have mentioned SMEs, so it would be quite logical for us to now ask Natalia a question. Natalia, what do you think? How does small and middle-sized business in Ukraine perceive the sustainable development requirements? What is already being done in that field? What can you tell from your point of view? And what do SMEs expect from the state? How could the state be helpful in this respect? Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Natalia Karpanchuk-Konopatska, and I'm the president of the Women's Business Chamber of Ukraine. Today, this is the largest organization dedicated to women's entrepreneurship development. We've got about 4,000 members, and besides that, I'm the vice president on international cooperation of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And SMEs are our members. You know, every day when I have a speech somewhere, I claim that before we start discussing global issues, we should understand that 15 million residents of Ukraine live in rural areas, which is quite a large share of people and quite many residents. And in times of war, rural population has not been evacuated. They didn't have the money, they didn't know how they were supposed to move. That's why mostly urban residents went somewhere, were displaced, or went abroad. These people are here, and when we're talking about sole proprietors or small enterprises, we have to realize that we have some sole proprietors working, small entrepreneurs working in rural areas. And in times of war, together with international donors, we launched the School of Entrepreneurship, where we train people from remote areas. We have our representative offices throughout Ukraine, and when we started going to small towns and villages and got acquainted with those entrepreneurs, I realized that we all live in parallel realities, because on the one hand, we are talking about directives, about implementation, about the notion of gender equality. I personally am actively engaged in the expansion of the opportunities of women. But when we reach those audiences, and by the way, during the wartime, we have had trainings for 4,000 sole entrepreneurs in those areas. So after doing this, we have understood that only one person in 100 knows about such notions as gender equality and social responsibility. Maybe just 1 in 100, or it could also be 0. And if I asked this one person to decipher what was meant by those notions, it was not always possible for them to do it. That's why I am claiming that we have to start with large communication, awareness-raising campaigns. We've got too few of them. And it sometimes seems to us that we all understand some basic notions like social responsibility, environmental, legal responsibility. And well, it's really true that businesses in large cities are balancing in between getting profits and realization of their social responsibility and impact on the society. And the events that started in 2015, then COVID, then invasion. So in that period, companies have been focusing on supporting their staff members. they have more trainings, they expand their understanding of their own impact, and they provide opportunities to the staff members to gain a different reality. Because we're all talking about the EU member states, but not everybody wants to follow the EU standards. That we have to realize this, and let's call it a spade. Every day I communicate with such large audiences, and that's how I came to realize this. I would also like to say, while answering your question regarding the expectations, nobody has any expectations from this as far as the state is concerned. Can the state help us with this? Well, it's very good that we do have some initiatives run by the Ministry of Economy, but now we really need is communication, awareness raising campaigns. We have had a number of events recently dedicated to the WEB's principles, and many companies do sign those WEB's principles. They now understand why these principles generally exist, but people need to be conveyed this message. And if we're talking about large business reaches everything by itself because they have many employees. Sometimes they have whole units that help with the implementation of those things. But when we're talking about SMEs, in particular about sole entrepreneurs, at the first count, it seems that, sole entrepreneurs cannot be engaged in that process because the directive refers to large companies only with 1,000 employees and 450 million turnover. But it all starts with small companies, and they also affect business as such. That's why we need to have awareness raising campaigns, communication campaigns, and the more of such campaigns we do have, the more people will be engaged in this process, and both in practical sense and in theoretical plane. They will at least understand why this is happening. Yes, and we are focusing on SMEs, and thank you for that. And you have mentioned that we need to leave our bubble and understand that what's happening in cities and in villages are two different things. I also support your statement about awareness raising campaigns. And actually, that is what we discussed in the morning. We mentioned that we need to think about the regulatory framework. We may truly believe that our country is moving towards improvement of standards, but we need to also realize that until we get any clear requirements in our legislation that would be prompting or guiding businesses to become better, we will either be working with unicorns, with the businesses that already have got some realization for those concepts, or their maternity holdings that are located in different legal field and help them shape this mindset. That's what we saw over the recent 10 years when the pioneers and the leaders in the Ukrainian business market from the point of view of compliance of the responsible business standards were large international companies that were forced to change in the countries of their origin, and they were further disseminating this culture, not quite quickly and not probably in the similar way to Ukraine, like the one from the US or from other countries. Or we have to create the rules of the game under which the business will gradually come to realize that they have to do something and that they will get competitive advantages. Let's go over to the question to our next online speaker, just to have some turns between the offline and online audience. My question is to Alana. Let me remind you that she's the lecturer in the business school of the Ukrainian Catholic University. So my question is, what are the main drivers for the implementation of sustainable business practices? What are your ideas regarding what business could get from the implementation of corporate sustainable development right now? You asked regarding this point by your students, and how do practices in Lviv differ from the practices in Kyiv, other cities? Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. It's really true that I also work in consulting in the EU member states, and it's really interesting to compare how it is now happening, how this is happening now there, and how it is all happening in this country. I support what has already been mentioned. I also think that the regulatory framework is something that matters. And now in Ukraine, we are implementing more and more standards, and we've got new legislative acts in October, the strategy for the implementation of reporting on sustainable development by companies was adopted. So it's a matter of time. And for us in Ukraine, the procedure will really be very quick. So I think that driver number one, on the basis of what I can see in the EU member states, is the regulatory policy. But besides that, there are a number of other drivers which we discuss with students, which we consider at my course, because besides the requirements, sustainable development also contains a number of opportunities. This is all about risk management. This is about the understanding of your stakeholders and taking their interests into account. This is also about adaptation of the projects that are implemented by companies in the field of corporate social responsibility regarding what different stakeholders need, in particular if we speak about our work with communities. So if we consider sustainable development at different stages, one of the most visible stages that could bring some benefits to business is everything related to efficiency and cost reduction, like energy efficiency costs, operational costs, the costs of repeat use of waste. So these things are closely related to economic benefits a company may gain. And I'm really happy to see that more and more programs, grant programs, donor programs, state programs are launched to support this, to make this happen, in particular in the issues of energy efficiency, which is a security issue for us. And Nadia, your great idea of climate accelerator, well, is also a very good thing because companies may learn what is that, how that can be implemented. If we speak about the next stage, that will be corporate social responsibility, and Ukrainian businesses, in particular after COVID times and after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, don't seem to have any problems because we have a number of programs. We have something to share with our EU colleagues, but there is a challenge as far as the coordination is concerned. We don't know whether this really corresponds to the needs of our stakeholders. And if we speak about the European standards, these standards enable the company not just to see what it wants to do, but to see how important this is and what a significant impact it has on the society and environment. The third stage is the so-called license to operate, which is the right to operate and to cooperate with some companies like multinational corporations, reaching the EU markets. And I can see that for many companies in Ukraine, this becomes a real driver because they are included into the value chains of large corporations, and the demand, the request comes from their clients. That could be a demand that starts with provision of the data on the company and up to the formalized reports, audits conducted by the customer. So, in fact, the number of iterations and actions will be on the rise and is already on the rise, in particular for the companies that want to cooperate with large corporations and to be in the EU markets. And also the pressure from the legislative point of view is on the rise. I've heard recently that starting with 2025, more than 1,000 Ukrainian companies will have to do reporting under CSRV, which is the CSRS European standards related to sustainable development. And this is quite a challenge because that will require a lot of trainings, a lot of awareness raising campaigns, which have to be performed very, very quickly. So I would say that what Europe did for about 10 or 15 years will have to be done in Ukraine within 1 year or 2 years. And definitely at different programs of the business school, we are also considering some drivers and benefits that the company may gain as a result of sustainable development, like talent engagement, because we understand that professionals want to work in companies that have far-reaching goals. We're also talking about the opportunities for innovations as far as services and products are concerned. We also claim that this would mean attractiveness for clients who prefer green type products, green businesses, responsible businesses, and definitely that will be attractive for investors. Probably it's not so well developed in Ukraine as in the countries abroad, but if we have a look at the requirements of the largest investment funds, you will see that they are not considering companies who do no reporting and which are not public as far as their initiatives related to sustainable development are concerned. And now, if we characterize the situation in Ukraine, we can see that to get large credits starting with 2025 from banks, the companies will have to fill out a questionnaire related to sustainable development. So even at the level of spreading the information about the company should already understand what it is supposed to do in order to fill out this questionnaire. Otherwise, it will come as a great surprise, negative surprise, and a challenge for them when they will have to speak in public about what they do for sustainable development. Thank you. Thank you, Olena. And may I have a clarifying question? You mentioned that you considering the advantages and competitive edges with your students, the advantages coming from responsible business conduct. But have you discussed these issues with businesses? What are the fears and barriers for businesses on that path? What prevents them from launching this direction? Well, definitely we have had this discussion. Normally, we start our training with the following question. Is it the right time to think about sustainable development in Ukraine if we live in wartime, in times of full-scale invasion? This is barrier number one, because definitely businesses do have their own priorities that want the business to survive. They want to support their staff. And the value of the business school is that we always have discussions. That's why we do put this questions to scrutiny. But as a result of those discussions, we normally reach the conclusion that these are not two different notions. They go side by side with each other, because war causes a number of challenges that we have somehow to cope with, both in the environmental and social directions. And if we have a look at the figures that we've got at the moment, showing that more than 50% of energy infrastructure have been destroyed. We do have significant environmental damages. We have this problem with the demining. And this all creates a whole set of challenges that we have to cope already now and will have to cope in the future. But this also evokes some opportunities for quick development of innovations and technologies. And that's something that we can already see. And I'm happy that among our students, we already have students who have launched some startup businesses, projects, and focusing on those problems. And in fact, we do realize that after the end of the war, when we go over to the European integration, all those things will have to be implemented very, very quickly. And that is a challenge. How do we quickly implement all those things? And definitely when we are talking about the restoration and recovery of Ukraine, I think that if you're interested in that matter and if you hear what I would want to say and what is included into the Green Facility Plan, so the keyword is build back better and build back greener, which means that everything that will be happening in Ukraine in the nearest future will have to contain this component of sustainable development. In particular, all new enterprises starting with 2025 will have to be built and be developing following the European standards. And for other businesses, there will be a 10-year transition period to meet the EU standards. So this is our first bias. We normally claim that it's not the right time now, but it is the right time because we see a number of challenges related to sustainable development. We have to start dealing with them already now. And the second barrier is finance. Well, it's not even a barrier, but it's a question. Where from do we get the money? Because these are normally long-term strategies that don't give an immediate effect. And it's important to realize that for Ukrainian business, the issue of funding is a priority, but we're also now considering different programs and opportunities And we can see that all the initiatives the companies are now implementing need to be analyzed to understand what these initiatives yield as a result. You need to have certain indicators and criteria to understand what benefits all those initiatives are bringing to businesses, because otherwise investors and managers sometimes think that these are just additional costs. So we are learning in the business school to assess this not as cost but as investment, and this is exactly the business approach based on analysis.
Thank you. In the first part, we have mentioned that so far CSDDD is not part of the negotiation package, but it will probably become one, and Ukraine has to think how we shall report about it and how we shall demonstrate implementation. But Olena has already mentioned the Ukraine facility document. We have all read the document, and it says that responsible business conduct is the direct part of attracting EU funds and international funds for recovery. Ukraine facility mentions OECD standards, so it's a roadmap for us. We have to implement it. It's an important message for business that wants to be engaged into those recovery projects, wants to get some investment and attract some funds. Now, I would like to give a question to Yulia, who represents SoftServe, and you already have experience of introducing responsible business conduct standards. So what were the obstacles for you and what were the benefits? Thank you for the invitation. At SoftServe, we try to implement sustainability projects, and we use social responsibility in our company for a long time. We deal with non-financial reporting since 2015, and it was not the requirement of the regulator. It was actually our willingness to meet the expectations and requirements of our clients. Ukraine for us is the market of talents, and all our business partners and clients are in Europe, in North America, South America, etc. And this process, they are much more advanced than we are, and know us as a potential vendor, and therefore they set a number of requirements to us, requirements and expectations we have to meet. It is one of the competitive advantages that helps us develop our business and build better relationship with our partners and clients. The talent market is also becoming more and more demanding, and there were some recent research of auditing companies how the Z generation is doing, what are their expectations to their potential employer, and the responsible business from the fifth place goes to much lower place because there are some other requirements in the market. It's not only Ukraine facing the crisis, but we are talking about global economic crisis touching the IT sector, many big players in the market. And the requirements of those people to their potential employers in this that way are part of responsible business conduct. And one of the competitive advantages is to meet both the expectations of the regulator and of people, because this is the reality we face right now, and this is the reality which will be in Ukraine in the future. And this is one of the expectations of our clients and partners. What obstacles or difficulties have you faced on this path? Probably can share some business cases. What you have started with, our initiative to submit reporting actually was related to our vision that sooner or later it will be part of our future, and it is inevitable future, and we have to get ready for this process. So if it is the requirement for us in the future, we have to take the first step already now. Therefore, we were trying to be proactive, to be ahead of time, and we were taking those steps, and we were trying to expand the scope of our activities. We were providing more and more reporting. We were demonstrating best practices, and it was a good way of growing without causing detriment to business, but vice versa, illustrating to your management how you do your business, how you see the development of your company, considering that this is a global company present in different markets and facing different challenges in each of these regions. Here in the room is also my colleague Julia, who is responsible for environmental sustainable development, and she also has a number of challenges regarding implementation of green initiatives in our company, and it is one of the biggest priorities in Ukraine, considering our energy crisis and how it influences the business conduct. Alana, in her presentation, has mentioned that this year more than 100 Ukrainian companies will provide social sustainability reporting. And though we have lots of standards, not all businesses, big and small, know what's what, know what to start with. Not everybody has such luxury as big maternity company with good best practices that can be implemented and duplicated. So my blitz question to all people present here is, what is your request regarding who can help with enlightenment, with teaching, with mentoring? So who are those stakeholders? Should it be done by business associations or government or donors or public sector? So what is your opinion on this question? And I see already that there is somebody in the audience who would like to answer the question. I will probably start. I represent several organizations. Therefore, I would like to say that trade, chambers of trade and commerce, and NGOs and public and associations of business organizations are ready to become the platform for discussions. We are ready to be the communicators. We are ready to communicate with big companies and small companies in order to get engaged into the first enlightenment activities. Well, it will be the answer and the comment. So what can be done by the state and who should be responsible for this awareness raising? Well, I'm not a person who is against sustainable development. I actually deal with sustainable development and I share all those values and I see the attractiveness and I see the profitability behind them. But it should be mentioned that the state, first of all, should protect its own market. If you studied economy, you have probably heard that this model of competitive market economy is the export model, so to say, because any market, any country is trying to protect its own entrepreneurs. And the question is to the state. It's necessary to understand how we can protect our own entrepreneurs, how we can protect small and medium businesses, how we do something to make these requirements a competitive advantage and not the nail to the coffin of small and medium business. And for example, if our companies have to export some goods in small packages, and at the same time, we import the goods in big packages. So we should find certain requirements that will ensure better protection to our manufacturers and that will ensure competitive advantages for our manufacturers. So we should avoid the situations when something is not fair. So somehow we have to implement these requirements in a way that protect our entrepreneurs. And it's a good platform to do it with the help of the government, with the help of partners, with the help of business associations. All the platforms, all the clusters are good. Now we already have experts who can consult you how you can do it better. But in my opinion, cooperation is always something that helps. For example, we have already our own experience of working with top consultants, and there are always lots of questions and challenges. So if we cooperate with our colleagues, with our counterparts, and with the third parties, it will always be better. Because, well, sustainable development is both about cooperation and about sustainable development. Thank you. You have mentioned many points here, and we have one more comment. Thank you, dear colleagues. I represent Ukrainian Polytechnic University academic community, and I would like to show one more platform which is also very effective. We cooperate a lot with Olena and Ala. I also think that educational component is also the platform which is a driving force for understanding youth community. Youth that later will become individual entrepreneurs, will build small and medium enterprises. Lots of our students are working in soft serve, and I'm really happy that lots of students who presented their PhD now are engaged in different organizations and projects. For example, Open Eyes, this is your project, a very serious one. And I also support Julia regarding complexity. We cannot talk about an isolated platform. It won't make sense. And I agree with Metro that we should have something in common, because if we divide things, the situation will be fragmented. So I really support the idea of unity, and Ukrainian Catholic University is the platform that actually brings all the best together. Daria and Lana, are you ready to answer the questions? Who are the stakeholders? Or probably there are already stakeholders you cooperate with. I see Alana. I would like to provide a comment here. The question of sustainable development is always about complex approaches, complex issues. And here we do not have just one owner of these problems. And if we are talking about enlightenment, there is no key stakeholder who should be doing it. Everybody should be involved in this activity. And from what I see, associations are playing a crucial role in this respect. They create certain discussion platforms, for regarding our national legislation, the international one, etc. And academic institutions, yes, we have to train special experts in this respect. And one of the two key goals of the strategy is training experts, specialists, for example, in the field of audit. And corporate sustainability reporting actually needs its own auditors. And talking about the small companies who right now do not have provide this reporting and still has a couple of years ahead to be involved in this activity, I will probably recommend that the companies see what they already have, what they already implement, and very often there are certain initiatives coming from the inside of the company, coming from the owners of the company. And sometimes people do not even understand that they are already doing something in the area of corporate development. It's also necessary to see what are the gaps, what are the best practices. I'm sure that in Ukraine, we do not have just single companies that will start it from scratch. We are talking about developing competences, developing skills, and the sooner the companies start doing it, the easier it will be for them further. Daria, do you have any comment? I'll be really very brief. I'll support what has been just mentioned, and I would like to say that we follow the concept of collective actions, a sort of a triangle, that these are joint efforts of our organization, business, the government, NGOs, civil society organizations, because it is impossible to implement certain social changes only with the efforts of one single organization. And therefore, we engage lots of experts, both national and international ones, because we have to study from best practices. And we do it in partnership with many organizations like UNDP and other partners from European countries and not only European. So we work, we develop the programs, and synergy is the key word here. Thank you very much for mentioning UNDP. UNDP has developed a number of tools that are really useful for businesses on their way of responsible business conduct, and some of them are in your handouts. And we also have a person online who wants to ask a question. Please, Alexandra. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's my pleasure to join the discussion. My name is Alexandra Humanna. I also represent the academic community. I am a lecturer in Kyiv Mohyla Academy, and I'm interested in the issues of sustainable development as the head of the Association of Sustainable Development Experts. And I would like to provide this comment about stakeholders. But this is something we also face. And this is the financial sector. We understand that the banking system, the banking institutions in general, probably even if they don't want to, but still have to use the sustainable development standards. And what is the most interesting point? When they start applying these standards, they work with their own clients. And it means that their clients have to become sustainable in their practices. That means something is done on a voluntary basis. Something is done in line with the current requirements. And again, financial sector is very active right now. Active in the area of getting training, gaining new knowledge, implementing their strategies and financial reporting. So I think this process will be development, more and more stakeholders will join the process, and I'm sure that the process will be much quicker. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other comments? If not, I would like probably to finish this conversation. Thank you very much for all your reports, your comments, reflections, and ideas. On the one hand, we do need regulatory framework. We do need good cases. But on the other hand, we do need to engage all the stakeholders into the discussion about this framework, about the requirements on the one hand, and support from the government on the other hand, for businesses to be able to improve the standards and to still get some profit. And there is this request for business to be included into this process. So whether the government is ready to hear business and stimulate this discussion, well, I see that Marina is the only one who represents the Ministry of the Economy, but it seems to me now we see that it's good time for all the stakeholders to get together and speed up this process. But Marina? Just a couple of words. From the very beginning of my work on developing these policies, my position has always been like this. Only the involvement of all the stakeholders will enable us to get the results we want to achieve, because we are doing it not only for the state as such, but also for people, for businesses. So I am not only the representative of the government, but I'm also a citizen of Ukraine, and I'm interested in everything that is related to sustainable development. So we are all the time open. Cooperation with all the stakeholders is our primary goal and our main idea. regarding current and also future developments. Thank you very much for this reflection, and I do hope that next year we are going to see the topics of responsible business conduct on some bigger platforms. It will be part of some general business discussions on investments, on our path to the EU, on competitiveness. And also, we shall discuss definitely human rights and their protection in business. Now we have lunch, and at 2:30 we start our academic discussion: impact of business on human rights, rule of law, and democracy, rethinking the role of law in society. Thank you very much, dear online participants. Thank you for joining us. The other events will be held online, but I do hope we'll meet you in person. If not, your certificates will be sent to your post. Thank you, dear interpreters. Thank you, dear technicians. Everything went smoothly, and we invite everybody to have lunch. And please, we have to be really responsible regarding nutrition, and we have to eat everything, not to throw any food away.